All right, everybody, welcome back into Cherry Picking. Today's video is the top 50 fantasy hockey rankings that actually just dropped from Hockey News. I'm lucky enough to have a guest with me today, Steven Psihogios. He was on the show last year. Lucky to have him on nice and early this season. Steven's a digital producer over at NorthStar Bets and used to be a Yahoo fantasy hockey contributor, writer, editor. He used to do it all. So he's a really good guy to have on the show today. Really excited to talk these top 50 because there's definitely some players we're going to disagree with this list, and I'm sure there'll be some that are in the right spots.
Oh, for sure. It's great to be on, Ryan. It's nice to break up. It's so football heavy this time of year. I like getting back into the hockey part of my brain.
Yeah, I'm in the exact same boat as well, so I'm excited to talk some hockey before we get into the top 50 list. Just for our viewers out there, we are this is pretty much excluding bangers leagues, so hits and block shots and all that. These rankings are mainly just points, goals, assists, power play points. Some of these guys that are on this list, I'll mention that if they have a lot higher value in bangers leagues, and there's obviously some guys on the list that are a little bit more obvious. But let's look at the top 10 here right away. So you'll see the top 10 on your screen. You'll see obviously Connor McDavid, Nathan McKinnon, Leon Draisaitl, kind of the top three pretty much in any type of league that you're looking at. It's been the same kind of deal for the past couple of years. Austin Matthews a little further down than years past, but you have Jack Hughes at 4, David Pastrnak at 5, Jason Robertson at 6, and then Matthew Tkachuk, Kirill Kaprizov, and Rantanen to round out that top 10. The first guy I want to talk about, because obviously he had an incredible year last year, is Jack Hughes. I don't think you can really argue too much with the top three, but at 4, like, are you taking a shot at Hughes at 4, even his production last year with them bringing in a couple more guys? Do you think he fits in that 4th role right now, that 4th spot?
I wouldn't hate it if you took Hughes at 4. That's not who I'm taking, though. The guy who I think should be at 4 and maybe even challenge that top 3 is Austin Matthews. I think he's being pretty discounted. I know he's still a top 10 pick, but I'm looking at the guys in front of him. Like, I would take him over Robertson. Like, Robertson was fantastic last year, and Dallas will probably be good again this year. But Matthews, that upside is more than what we've seen Robertson offer. Robertson had a great year, did have a 60-goal year. We know that's in Matthews' realm of possibilities. Pasternak's another guy. Take it from a Bruins fan. I'm not expecting him to have this type of season that he had last year. Look at how just how much talent has left the Boston Bruins this offseason. Bergeron, Krejci down the middle. You lose Bertuzzi on the wing. Taylor Hall is gone. And they really haven't replaced these guys with anyone of that level. I expect the Bruins to take a big step back, especially offensively. They're going to be, I've said it, they're going to play Islanders hockey next year. The defense is really good. They've got 2 goalies you can rely on, like the Islanders have for so many years. But the offense, they just don't have that high-end pivot that makes me feel good, or that high-end setup, man, that makes me feel good about taking Pastrnak that high.
Yeah, I totally agree with both those takes. I think we're going to see a little bit of regression from Jason Robertson and Pastrnak. I mean, you're looking at a guy that has pretty much solely played with David Krejci and Patrice Bergeron the last 2 years, or over the course of his career, and just been phenomenal with them. Pavel Zacha doesn't really instill the same amount of confidence, or neither does Charlie Coyle or Morgan Geekie, another guy that they've kind of brought in. And then Robertson, on the other hand, as well. In terms of 5-on-5 hockey, his numbers, when I was looking at them yesterday, kind of weren't as impressive as you'd think. And obviously, this team relied heavily on a lot of their power play last year with the Dallas Stars. But you're looking at guys around him in terms of 5-on-5 production last year and expected goals for: Dawson Mercer, Zach Parise, Andrew Mangiapane. So will he have that same amount of skill when he's shooting the puck and scoring goals next year? I don't really think so. And then I totally agree. Austin Matthews, I mean, even last year, he missed a couple games. He obviously didn't have a 60-goal season like we saw the year before. He still led the NHL in expected goals for in 5-on-5 hockey. I think that's a huge number that you can bank on to know the fact that he will have a good season next year. Now, for the rest of this Leafs team, I'm still not sold that they can get it done when it comes to the playoffs, but we're just talking fantasy hockey here, and I don't want to upset too many Leafs fans. So, and then just looking at Matt Tkachuk, obviously had an interesting year last year. One of those players that definitely provides a lot more value in bangers leagues with hits and blocks. He kind of Swiss Army knife in that sense. But what are your thoughts of where he's ranked on this list, and just kind of the Florida Panthers overall after making the Stanley Cup final?
I personally would take Kucherov over I take Tkachuk. I know Kucherov slips into that next 10, so kind of teasing how high I am on Kucherov. But he had the injury late last season. They played a lot of hard hockey. And injuries hampered the Florida Panthers all last regular season. If you look, that's probably the biggest reason why they were the 8th seed in the Eastern Conference, was because they couldn't stay healthy. Now, Tkachuk, he's had the offseason to recover, but it's a shorter offseason than most guys are dealing with. And I think he's being inflated just a little bit based on what we saw in the playoffs. I expect him to still turn in another really good season, but I won't be using a top 10 pick on Matthew Tkachuk.
All right. All right. So yeah, you did tease Kucherov there. So we'll look at the next 10, 11 to 21. So Nikita Kucherov right there at 11. And then you have Elias Peterson at 12. Marner, Tim Stützle, a guy that I'm definitely want to touch on because I think it's just him seeing him that high in my mind is a little strange at this point. And then, Tage Thompson, who obviously had a fantastic year. We see the first goalie and first defenseman after that with Sorokin and Makar. And then Vasilevsky and Ottinger as well. And then Zibanejad to kind of round out that top 20. So I want to talk about Tim Stützle first. I love Timmy Stu, but it just seems crazy high for me. Like, I think I'd rather take Brady Tkachuk. Obviously, if you're in a bangers league, I'm definitely taking Brady Tkachuk over Tim Stützle. But still, Tim Stützle is being ranked 14th in this kind of league format, and then also banger leagues format as well. He did have 90 points last year, but you add Vladimir Tarasenko, Josh Norris comes back into the fold after being injured as well. Especially if he is playing with Tarasenko, who I don't think is as good as he used to be. Like, his shot's not there. He's older. Do you see him producing another 90-point season?
I did not like seeing Stützle up there. I see he's getting gassed up by some people in the fantasy community, and it's nice to project things. But why would I take Stützle when there's a guy going picks later like a Mika Zibanejad or a Braden Point, who's doing basically what we want to see out of Stützle? And they both also have much better supporting cast. Losing Alex DeBrincat is no small thing. Like, that is one of the better goal scorers in the NHL. So that loss in itself is a big loss for Stützle and a big hit to his fantasy value. I'd much rather, like, when I see him just right behind a guy like Elias Pettersson, I just don't think that makes a whole lot of sense. Pettersson was like top 10 in points per game last year, really efficient. Stützle, we'd love to see it, but I feel like we're drafting him at his high point. Like, I don't see him sneaking into that top 10. I don't know how he becomes all of a sudden a top 10 or a top 5 pick in fantasy. So when you're drafting him right now, you're pretty much picking him at the highest end of his scenarios for this upcoming season.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think he's wildly being overrated in this list, at least as the other, fantasy hockey rankings come out. I'll be curious to see where he's slotted in there. And then, looking a little bit further down, you do see Cale Makar. I think that's relatively consensus in terms of the first defenseman off the board. I think you'll see that for the next, I don't know how many years, as long as he's in the league, pretty much. He's just fantastic, especially, he does it all. The shots, points, goals, hits, like, he's on the ice all the time. So he's obviously going to be contributing. Let's talk about the goalies that are in this tier as well, though. You have Ilya Sorokin, who's always been, you talked about it before, have a good goalie, and the Islanders play a solid defensive game, don't score a ton of goals, but Sorokin's is so good that they can rely on him. And then you have Vasilevsky and Jake Ottinger. Out of these three goalies, who are you kind of pulling the trigger on if you have to by this pick?
I'm going with Sorokin just because we've seen him do it, and he's got a backup in Varlamov who is getting a little older. So he's not necessarily poor Varlamov, but he's just playing less and less, which isn't a bad thing for Sorokin. He's got someone at least to give him a few nights off. Like, Vasilevsky, the issue's always been he just can't get nights off. And I don't think that's going to change all that much going into this season. And Ottinger, I was surprised at how high Ottinger was considering what we know. Like, he really started to fade at the end of last season in the playoffs, particularly. So that to me says Dallas is going to give him some more nights off. I like this Dallas team. I think they did well this offseason to improve their roster, but I don't see Ottinger handling the same amount of work. And we have to again, like I said, it's similar with Stützle. We can't draft guys at the highest end of their range of outcomes. And that's what it feels like you're doing with Ottinger. For as good as he's been, his save percentage still fell below 920 last year, came in at 919. And he really did look like he was getting tired as the postseason wore on. So I am just a little bearish about Ottinger right now.
I totally agree there in terms of like the playoffs as well. Looking at his stats, he had the lowest goal saved above expected -8 last year in the playoffs, which that's a staggering stat for a guy who's been, we look at the playoffs the year before when they played against Calgary, and he was putting up those insane nights of 50 plus saves game after game. I don't think we're really seeing the exact or the same Audie right now. So looking at the next tier, though, I kind of want to just mention because I'm in love with Igor Shesterkin this year just because I really like this Rangers team and what they did in the offseason. I think bringing in Peter Laviolette is such an addition for how this team will play overall. We saw the Rangers last year. Sure, they finished third in the Metropolitan. They exceeded 100 points. They had a good roster, but Patrick Kane and Vladimir Tarasenko, I don't really think made any sense adding them for the playoff run. But I really like Laviolette. I really like them bringing in Blake Wheeler and, some more depth guys on that forward side as well. And then this defensive core is so good. And we've seen Laviolette have such a good kind of relationship and be able to activate his defense with, guys like John Carlson and years past before with the Flyers and the Predators as well. So I think this is going to just help Igor Shesterkin. So I think for me, it's Ilya Sorokin and then Igor Shesterkin. I don't know what your thoughts are on the Rangers this year or even Igor Shesterkin's fantasy value, but I'd love to get your take on that.
Yeah, seeing him behind Connor Hellebuck on this list was puzzling to me because the situation's not getting better in Winnipeg. This is a team that might be approaching a full-on rebuild. And Hellebuck, hey, maybe he gets shipped out to a contender, but we don't know where he might end up. And you don't want to bank on that in fantasy hockey, especially with a second or a third round pick. I'm taking Shesterkin over him every day of the week. The Rangers, like you said, a much stronger team defensively, a team that we know is going to be in the postseason and likely be pushing for first in the Metro. I'll take Shesterkin over Hellebuck. You also have to worry about Hellebuck, too. He's played so much over these last 3 or 4 seasons. When is that going to catch up to him? Because it does wear on a position, especially like goalie, that's so taxing when you're playing every single night. I know they got Brossoit in as the backup now. Maybe he gets a couple more nights off, but that's even more reason to fade Hellebuck at where he's going.
Yeah, totally. And then we'll change the topic of discussion here and talk about some forwards that are next on this list. Braden Point, Artemi Panarin, William Nylander, and Brady Tkachuk from 25 to 28. All really good options if you are looking to take a goalie before, you get to these guys. So when you're looking at, we'll exclude Braden Point from this list because I think Braden Point's fantastic. And I think he'll have another really good year, probably 50 goals again, if I'm being realistic. But looking at Panarin, Nylander, and Brady Tkachuk, because Nylander maybe not in a different situation, but Panarin, brings up maybe some new faces on this Rangers team. I think he'll probably be playing with Blake Wheeler if I had to guess. And then Brady Tkachuk as well. Similar situation to Tim Stützle, but his production last year was crazy. I was looking at his expected goals. It was one of the highest in the league. He creates a ton of high danger chances for himself as well. So I'm really high on Brady Tkachuk, but how do you see these three kind of playing out?
I like Tkachuk as well. I just think he's able to fill so many buckets. My strategy in fantasy, I love getting players who just take a ton of shots on goal because, one of these years, if you're a consistent high shot on goal, high shot volume type of guy, it's just going to go in at a crazy rate. So I will continue to take my chances with a guy like Brady Tkachuk because I know he's going to finish the year top 10 in shots. He's going to get me a ton of hits. And like I said, one of these years is just going to be like a Chris Kreider type of year. Kreider was always one of those guys, put a lot of pucks on net, was a big shooter because he hung around the front of the net, would just get in a lot of the high danger shots because of where he plays. And he had that 50-goal season 2 years ago. I could see Tkachuk having a breakout year like that where just everything goes right for him. So if I were to pick from that group, I'm with you. I'm going with Tkachuk, especially when you throw the hits on top of all that and the penalty minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we'll touch on goalies right before we jump into our fourth tier here, just because I think having these two guys at the end of this, at the top 30 is quite interesting because it's two goalies in completely different situations, right? You have Alexander Georgiev, who came over from New York last year, played with Colorado, had a good year, finished 9th and goal saved above expected. Obviously didn't translate really to the playoffs as much. Colorado with an early exit there, but Jussi Saros he was the number 1 goalie in fantasy hockey last year. But this Nashville team is obviously looking at pretty much a complete rebuild. Now you're bringing in Barry Trotz. Obviously, it looks like they're really going to try to get this team turned around, and you don't really know how long that's going to take. And Saros has played so many starts. You mentioned about Hellebuck before. He's played so many games over the past couple of years. So are you leaning towards taking Georgiev over Saros if it comes down to it?
I wouldn't touch 3 goalies in this tier, and it's Hellebuck. I wouldn't touch Saros, and I wouldn't touch Georgiev either. This Colorado team, especially when you look at the Stanley Cup odds, like if you go over, going to plug it, NorthStar Bets. They're still the odds-on favorites to win the Stanley Cup, and it's by like 400 points. They're like plus 700, and the next closest team in the field is plus 1150. I don't understand it. You have Gabriel Landeskog, who's going to miss this entire season with that knee injury. They still don't have a true number 2 center. Like, this is a team, sure, the high-end talent is very good, and I'll jump on them in fantasy because they're going to rely on these guys to get the job done, because there's really, especially up front, there's not a whole lot of depth. And Georgiev, you know, he put up the wins last year because this was a good Colorado team. I don't know if you can expect them to be as good this year. I really don't see a whole lot of depth on this team. And as well, as you mentioned with Saros, this is a team going through a full-on rebuild. Saros will make up for mistakes, but I don't see this team playing its way into a wild card hunt like it kind of was late last season. And if my goalie's not going to get me a high number of wins, and I'm not so sure that the save percentage is going to be great either because the defense is getting worse, I might just pass altogether on all 3 of these guys.
Okay. Yeah, I like that. I like that take for sure. I think they're both in interesting situations. As we look at the next kind of group of 10 here, and obviously Alex Ovechkin, like this guy is just it never phases to, or never he impresses me every year now at this point. Like, with the fact that he can continue with this production, such a high level, his goal scoring ability, and to be honest, like Washington's team overall has just gotten worse and worse and worse since they've won a cup pretty much. So do you see his level of production staying where it's been the last 2 years, as he is ranked 34th on this list again?
Yeah, I'm not pulling the trigger on Ovi there. Call me a sucker, because when was the last time you've seen Ovechkin go this late in a fantasy hockey draft? But I just can't do it. You've got Backstrom, who is a yearly injury concern. You never know with that guy, and you've got Kuznetsov, who might get traded this year. So there's a lot of uncertainty with Washington. Who's going to be playing around him? As you said, the roster just keeps getting worse and worse every year. It's older. This is even a guy like Tom Wilson. Like, okay, he's not the oldest guy in the league. I think he's like 29, 30. But look at how hard he's played all these years. Like, those have been some heavy miles. Like, he's not a lightly used sports car here. This is your grandfather's pickup truck that's been run through the mud. It's got dent. There's rust all over it. Like, he's been pretty beaten up. So this is a Washington team that, again, I don't know what they're doing. They're kind of trying to retool on the fly, but I think they really need to gut it.
Yeah, I agree there. I would also be staying away from Ovechkin there. And then another guy on this list that I don't know. Their power play is so good, but I don't see Ryan Nugent-Hopkins really producing at the same level as he did last year. Like, I was looking at his 5-on-5, hit 39 points in 5-on-5 hockey last year. It's 57th in the NHL. He relied solely on that power play to have the season that he did. I mean, kudos to him, obviously, being placed there. But, if anything happens on that first power play and they change it up, there goes a guy that you're taking in the 3rd round pretty much. Just comparing it to the rest of the league, he had the same amount of 5-on-5 points as Vincent Trocheck, Nick Suzuki, and Braden Shen last year. Like, all guys you're going to be looking at way further down the board when you're drafting your fantasy hockey teams. So what are your thoughts on Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, and even like just players in general that are going to be relying solely on power play points to produce?
I think, like, as a general rule of thumb, you shouldn't take these guys, but there's always exceptions to the rule, and I think this Edmonton power play is one. I don't expect them to set the power play percentage record for a second straight season. They'll take a step back, but I still think as long as Nuge has a spot on that unit, they're going to be dangerous and very difficult to stop. So I don't hate Nuge as much as maybe some other people will when looking at the numbers. It's easy to point at it and say, you look at power plays of the past, like it's been so one year to the next, up and down. I think with this Edmonton group, I think we just have to accept the fact that they're just abnormal all across the board. And as long as he's getting those 5-on-4 chances with Connor McDavid, with Leon Draisaitl, I'm okay. I'm okay taking Nuge there. It's a risky proposition, but it's one that I think at the end of the day really can pay off, especially because we know in category leagues, power play points are worth a lot. So I will stick with Nuge, although he's not my favorite player in that bunch, but he is one of the ones I'm more high on, I guess, than the rest.
So that bunch of centers right there, who are you kind of eyeing on then?
Nico Hischier. It might be surprising, but Hischier, listen to this stat. He only assisted on 3 of Jack Hughes' goals last year. Like Hughes scored 43 goals last season, and Hischier only factored in on 3. So the point jump that we saw him make was not because he was riding Hughes' coattails. There's room for this guy to chip in, I think, even more offensively. They lock in Timo Meier. They're going to have him for a full season. This Devils team is really loaded up front. They add Tyler Toffoli as well. I really like what New Jersey has done this offseason, and I think like he hit 80 points last year. I think he can push 90, and he's someone who's going to give you a lot of face-off wins. And he's one of those players that I just think we haven't seen him really tap into that full potential yet. He's still young, so I like Hischier a lot.
Yeah, he's still very young. I think that's a really interesting point you make. I didn't know that about assisting on just 3 of his 43 goals. Wow. So he's really kind of just took his production into his own hands. And then this year, I'm sure the chemistry between those two guys and the rest of this team, because really the only new piece of that top 6 is Tyler Toffoli, you can slot him anywhere. You just give a pass on the puck and he'll shoot and score. So I love that take. And I'm kind of in lockstep with you there. And then looking at the last 10 guys here, I think, 41 and 42 on this list, Clayton Keller and Alex DeBrincat, 2 guys at similar positions in their career in terms of age. Obviously, DeBrincat's had better seasons than Clayton Keller. I think we saw Clayton Keller kind of more breakout last season, but I think DeBrincat for me, is the clear choice to take here. Just looking at the Arizona team, I don't have a ton of faith that Keller will be able to produce a 90 point season this season. And, he had 86 points last year, which was by far his career high. But Alex DeBrincat, I mean, you pair him with Lucas Raymond. Lucas Raymond had a down year last year, a guy who's always been known for his playmaking abilities. You give him with a true goal scorer like Alex DeBrincat, a guy who scored over 40 goals in 2 of his seasons. I think these two could be a match made in heaven. So what do you think about these 2 guys and their fantasy value going into this season?
Keller was strange because that Arizona team caught real hot down the stretch. I remember just taking Yote's puck line like
Yeah.
after the All-Star break on a pretty routine basis, and it was paying off because Keller was playing out of his mind. And he's a streaky player. We've seen it throughout his career, him have hot stretches and then cold stretches. He can be frustrating to roster in fantasy, at least with the Brinket. We know he's going to shoot the puck a lot. And this Detroit team, I think, has been waiting for a true like guy to run their power play through. I like Dylan Larkin. He's a good center, but I'm not running my power play through Dylan Larkin. He doesn't have an elite shot. He's always been a kind of jack of all trades, master of none type of guy. Here you have DeBrincat now, who's a legitimate goal scoring threat. So I think this Detroit team is going to filter itself through DeBrincat. He's going to continue to shoot the puck a lot, and I think there will be, his routine 40 goal plus upside that you get from him every single season. So yeah, I'm taking DeBrincat over Keller. It's just hard to justify taking a Coyote that high in a draft.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there as well. And then looking at just the last player I want to kind of just touch on, because obviously he won the Norris last year, he had an insane season, but really was the biggest point producer on that team along with Timo Meier before he got traded. But Erik Karlsson now on the Pittsburgh Penguins, like, do you see any chance that he replicates a season like we did last year? Because there were a couple down years for sure for Karlsson, and then he just found of youth over there in San Jose. I don't really happen, but what are you kind of expecting from Karlsson now on this Pittsburgh team?
I'm not that high on Karlsson this year. It was kind of a strange year. No one really saw it coming. It was always, how are they going to trade this Karlsson contract, the Sharks? That was the big issue. It was like, oh, what a bad contract this is. So now after 1 year, everyone's going to say, oh, he's a 100-point defenseman. Maybe the contract's not that bad. I'll have to see it for another year. And he's going to have to learn, to get along with new teammates and how he's going to fit in. I think that'll be really interesting to see how Pittsburgh deploys itself on the power play. You figure they're going to go 2 defensemen with him and Letang, and then you'd put Gensel, Malkin, Crosby up front. But again, I want to see how this all plays and meshes before I pull the trigger on Karlsson in drafts, because we've seen for a long time before last year, at least for a couple seasons, that this guy was not the point producer he once was. So we'll see. And everyone in Pittsburgh's a year older. That's another thing to keep in mind. When you're high 30s like Crosby and Malkin and Letang, those years, that year-to-year jump hits all that much more. Even for Crosby, we always say this is one guy who seems to have avoided the aging curve, but eventually Father Time will catch up to Sidney Crosby. So I'm a little more weary about this Penguins team, especially considering how they performed last year.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not too high on Erik Karlsson this year. I mean, it's kind of like a wait and see how this retirement home over in Pittsburgh kind of figures it out this year. But defense in general will kind of be interesting in fantasy hockey this year, as you see the list is kind of slim on them in the top 50. But Steve, I really appreciate you coming on today. We'll definitely have you on at another point in the season. Quickly before you go, do you have who's your Stanley Cup winner this year?
Stanley Cup winner this year. I've only placed one bet so far, and it was on the Seattle Kraken at
Oh
50 to
my
1. I'm
That's crazy.
slapping down on the Kraken. I will say, full disclosure, I made that bet before free agency. I thought they would do a little bit more with the cap space they had, but I guess we're banking on the Shane Wright breakout. Matty Beniers takes it to another level, and the Kraken are your 2024 Stanley Cup champions.
All right, it's bold, 50 to 1. That's a big payday. I like the boldness this early in the summer. It's when you can kind of fly around some takes. So, Steve, I really appreciate you coming on again. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe this video if you guys enjoyed. Love to hear your guys' thoughts on the top 50 fantasy hockey rankings from Hockey News, and if you agreed with any of our takes. And I'll see you guys next time.